All right. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to our session. We will give everyone just a couple of minutes to get settled. And if you've joined one of our webinars before, you know I love to give you a question to let us get to know you a little bit in the chat. And because Jordan and I have this love-hate relationship when it comes to football, and it's football season, let's talk about your favorite your favorite. We can do sports in general because not everyone's a football team. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan. Go Chiefs, go Taylor Swift. Jordan is unfortunately a fan of the Raiders. It's tough to
Right.
be a
More
Raider.
black. Yeah.
But if you like to watch any sort of sport, participate in any sports teams, let us know how you like to spend your time. Hi,
I
Steve.
agree with John Daly in the chat. He's in St. Louis, hates the Chiefs. So we're going to get along, John.
John, I will only take that if you hated us before we started winning, because Kansas City and St. Louis has a thing and it's real. So I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that. Oh, Savannah Banana is so fun. I try every year to get those tickets. It's like the hardest ticket to get. It's harder than getting Taylor Swift tickets. The Maple Leafs.
You Canadians with the three down football. Uh,
I love it. I,
Melissa's on Team Raiders. That's right.
we'll see. We'll see what they can do this year.
I don't see a Chiefs fan in the chat, Jen. I'm just saying. Like,
It's all right. I'll be a big
oh,
enough
there's
fan.
one, Kim Edwards.
Right. I'll be a big enough fan for everyone. Well, look at all these Phillies fans. I love it. Only because I love the New Heights podcast and Jason Kelsey. I'll be a little bit on that Eagles side, except for the Super Bowl was a tough one this year. All right. It looks like we've got a pretty good audience joining us today, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Jordan, you want to go ahead and share your slides? So like I said, welcome to today's webinar. We appreciate everyone taking some time in the afternoon to joining us today for Mastering Microsoft Purview, Planning, Implementing, and Governing Records Management. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Millett, Vice President of Event Strategy and Partnerships here at ARMA International. And if you are a member, thank you so much for taking advantage of your membership and being a valued member of our community. If you are not a member of ARMA, take a second and go check out arma.org to see all the great things we have to offer. Everything from education courses, certifications, certificate sessions, great discussion boards based on industry groups. So great community, lots of good things to be a part of. Definitely go take a look at what we have to offer on arma.org and to consider coming a member today. We would definitely appreciate it. And jump on to the next slide. Near and dear to my heart is ARMA InfoCon, our premier event, the largest education conference dedicated to those in information, records and information governance. We will be in beautiful Phoenix from October 19th to the 22nd, but we do have a handful of very good pre-con sessions. Jordan and his team will be there to offer their hands-on Microsoft Purview records management training. So if you would like to come and get some real hands-on training, definitely take a look at our website. You can definitely just go to arma.org or infocon.arma.org to find out more information, but really, really good education, great networking, an awesome expo floor where you can see our friends at Cadence Solutions, get all kinds of good information, and learn more about products to help you do your job a little easier. So consider joining us for InfoCon. And then webinars. We've got lots and lots of webinars planned for you. Here's a few of the ones that are upcoming on our schedule. If you can either scan that QR code and it will take you to our event calendar where you can register early for all of these. Or again, just go check out our website and see all that we have to offer. We also send an email every Monday to let you know what the upcoming webinars are. So hopefully we've always got something on the docket to keep you up to date and learning all kinds of great new stuff. Moving on. A few housekeeping items. Our chat kind of moves quickly. So if you've got a thought you want to share, your experience or your, comments on something that Jordan or Tyler are talking about today, please pop that into the chat. We'd love to kind of hear your perspective. But if you've got a question for our experts today, make sure that goes into the Q&A box. That way, us behind the scenes can keep an eye on those and make sure we get them to our experts and they get answered. We also have a reaction bar. So if you hear something you like, you can definitely give Jordan and Tyler a thumbs up, an applause, a heart, whatever. We like to see those reactions come across the screen. And then we've also enabled closed captioning. So if you don't need that, you can just click that little arrow by the CC box and turn those off. And then a little something fun at the end when we have Q&A, if you would like to raise your hand and come on live and ask your questions, you can just hit that feature, raise your hand, and then we will let you come on live and ask your question live. So that's a few housekeeping items. And moving on to the next. Your frequently asked questions. Can you get a copy of the recording? And can you have the slides? Of course, we always send an email about 24 hours after the event with links to all of those things. So just keep an eye out on your inbox, and we should be sending an email with all the information how to access that information. And last but not least, I just want to thank Jordan and Taylor and their support. Cadence Solutions is one of ARMA's closest business partners, not just a business partner, our training partner. I think I mentioned earlier that they're doing a pre-con session for Microsoft Records Management. They also bring that session to us in a virtual training environment, which there's a session coming up next week, I believe. We offer it about once a month. So Cadence isn't only a great business partner, but also a great training partner. So if you're looking for some great Microsoft training, definitely take a look at our site. We've got some listings, or you can go, of course, directly to the Cadence site to see all the options they have for some great hands-on training. So with that, I will turn the show over to the two of you, and we will be back here in the back end for any questions or support that you guys might need. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jen. All right, welcome everyone. Tyler and I are going to tag team this one today on Mastering Microsoft Purview. We've given this presentation a few times. It's always very, very popular. Looks like we got well over 170 of you on the call here. So it's going to be a little bit different today in one aspect. At the end of the session today, we're going to randomly draw somebody to have a free ticket into our hands-on records management training course, the one that Jennifer was just speaking about in terms of our partnership with ARMA, to be attended August, September, November, or December. So stick around till the Q&A portion. We'll do a live draw for someone based on the number we pull from the chat through a random generator. I'll go through a bit of the agenda. I'm going to cover topic 1. Tyler's going to really hammer out topics 2 through 5. So I'll cover licensing. Tyler's going to take over, go through proper planning, some SharePoint best practices. Of course, Purview RM best practices, what it can and can't do. We're going to cover too, what it's good at, what it's not good at. Even though we're a Microsoft partner, we're going to be honest and kind of tell you some of the gaps that if you do need to go and maybe acquire different technology, you're going to learn that today, as well as some real world lessons learned from us, from Tyler, from going through and getting some battle scars through projects and demonstrations. So a bit about me, and then Tyler will let you unmute and introduce yourself. So I'm Jordan. I'm the founder and CEO of Cadence. I've been doing this for 20 years. Got gray hair before I'm 40 from doing all this implementation work. I focused on records management, learned from a records manager in a legal department at my local municipality, went out and founded Cadence shortly after that and spent a lot of time with OpenText and Microsoft in the RM and IM space. Tyler?
Thank you. I'm one of our senior consultants here at Cadence, so I've been here for about 2 years in the information governance space for my entire career here. And I just kind of specialize in actually going and implementing this stuff. So that's something that, I give some trainings and stuff, but I'm actually day-to-day in the weeds of all of these tools with these different clients. So those lessons learned really do derive from real world business examples. So excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Tyler. All right, I'm going to jump into licensing. This is one that a lot of folks kind of get drug into as they're trying to do a project. You don't want to learn about software licensing as an RM or IM person, or sometimes even in some of the IT roles, you don't want to worry about it. But there are some blockers that can happen as you go through to start use Purview functionality in terms of having the right license and being compliant with what Microsoft may deem as in line or in compliance. So the first thing that everybody always talks about M365. Well, there's actually two complete stacks inside of the 365 ecosystem. There's M365 and there's still O365. So some organizations only have Office 365 E5, some have M365 E5. And there's a few differences there. One is trainable classifiers, doesn't exist in the O365 E5 license, as well as if you're getting into a lot of the deeper security pieces in Purview and other Microsoft subproducts, they come in the M365 E5 side of things. So the main takeaway from this is if you want to go and do inheritable records management, meaning I put a label on something and it inherits down to content inside of a doc library, you're going to need an E5 license. So if you're playing in E3 and you're moving into a records project, you want to give that a check. Now, if you're working with IT or you're working with an executive sponsor and you're a larger organization, let's say over 2,000 headcount, 2,500 headcount, you may be on what they call an enterprise agreement. So Microsoft will periodically come in, negotiate a larger, broader agreement, and renew that every 3+ years. So that's your opportunity to kind of strike and say, maybe we should look at E5, mutually beneficial to Microsoft, of course. But that is a way of kind of tagging your project along with where the organization may be going in terms of getting those licenses in order. So I won't drain this whole slide in terms of checkboxes on all that, but essentially, if you're looking to do the inheritance side and apply records retention policies based on inheritance and different conditions, you want to be in the E5 side of things. A few things around the requirements, the differences, and then the recommendation, probably a few spoilers already from me, but you want to avoid audit violations. And what this is, and if Microsoft chooses to enact this, is if your records program, as in people use disposition review, it's an E5 feature. Every user that adds files to SharePoint will require an E5 license or equivalent. There's other things like IGMP, information governance and protection, that you can grab as well. Instead of going to E5, you can layer that onto an existing license. But that's one thing to really keep in mind, that you could be in violation of a license. And then you go through audit, and audit's just a bunch of investigators and lawyers, regardless of which software company, poking and prodding, trying to get paid. That's really what they're after. The differences between the licenses, as I mentioned, between E3 and E5. So they both allow manual classification. So if I want to manually have my user tag a document as a record, tag that label, you can do that in both platforms. Is that the best user experience? No. Are they actually going to go and tag that file that they put in the library? 90% likely they're not going to do that. E5 enables the automatic records management and the disposition review. So I can set a retention label at the library, have any of my users put the documents in the library, and it will inherit that retention label onto those documents. That's the change management win you're after. So in terms of recommendations, of course, it's going forward with an E5. Full disclosure, we're a Microsoft partner. We don't get paid to sell licenses. We just need the tools to do our job on the implementation side of things as a service provider. So this really doesn't matter what you buy, but we've left a couple references in here for a licensing guide as well as a full feature comparison matrix that you can click on once you receive this deck from the ARMA mailout. In terms of breaking this down or kind of summarizing it into a more consumable format, Purview is capable of the following things. So disposition approvals, destruction logs, essentially giving you defensible disposition and destruction. You can manage records in place within SharePoint. You can automatically apply retention to files, pull full audit trails past even 180 days, and apply retention to different data sources, SharePoint, Outlook, Teams chats, Copilot. So that's the great. What can't it do? Well, it doesn't do physical records management, which can still be a bit of a stumbling block for organizations that aren't just paper-based. We work with water utilities. We work with oil and energy that have, geology samples, water samples, rocks, everything in jars you can think of. It doesn't do stubbing, so it's not going to leave the stub of something and archive the item somewhere else. It doesn't do item level archiving, deletion of folders, libraries, or sites. You can't import disposition decisions, so if you want to backdate, that's not something that it's capable of. And you can apply retention to non-M365 data, which is kind of an obvious one, but can sometimes be overlooked if you're starting to integrate this with another system. You're trying to get this integrated with SAP, for example, or something else. If you are looking at tech tangent here, if you are looking at dropping in a doc management system into a custom built application inside your organization, or into, let's say, a legacy app that doesn't handle doc and records well, something that's really budding right now is called SharePoint Embedded. What it is SharePoint without the user interface that can be embedded into another application, and it honors and brings with it all the Purview capabilities as well. So that is a really neat piece of technology Microsoft's released within the last 6 to 12 months that can start to roll everything in for this non-data source Microsoft repositories into something as a repository inside SharePoint Embedded that Purview latches onto. I'm going to let Tyler take over from here. I'll monitor the chat, answer any questions I can, or queue them up for us at the end or near the end of the session. So Tyler, I will let you share.
Awesome. Perfect. Sharing it. Perfect. So one of the big things that a lot of people actually do overlook throughout records projects is that proper planning. Regardless of what industry someone that I work with is in, the planning is really that make or break of the entire project. So before we actually dive in and start classifying all these records and start thinking about how to configure retention labels and things like that, we should really look at getting a foundation built first, right? We can't build our house until we've set that concrete foundation down. So a couple things that we want to make sure that we are getting ready ahead of time is make sure we do have our approved record retention schedule, right? Our RRS. If we don't know what our physical records are, there's no way we can actually classify our digital records. Something else to note is that we want to make sure that this schedule is actually flexible. I have not been through a project with any records manager yet to this point where something new didn't come up, right? New document types come up every year. Sometimes we haven't looked at our retention schedule for 5 to 10 years. So we really do have to think about updating it as we go along and make sure that we are flexible to these changes. We also want to make sure our overall program is kind of ready to go, right? Have some different policies in place for our different documents. So things that are non-business records, can we delete them from the system? Are they transitory? Do we need to get rid of them pretty quick? Or are they okay to kind of float around there in sort of an interim state? As well, what is our records management policy? So when something is a record, what can we do with it? What can't we do with it, right? Is this where we declare it as a final record and now it's immutable? Or is this something that we can just keep in the system and we don't necessarily need to delete? Probably obvious, but in industry, not as obvious as you might think, is actually having some trained records management teams. Even if this is just one person, someone that is aware of your record retention schedule, as well as the greater compliance sphere that you operate in, is really, really important. And as you start to get to a digital space, oftentimes we do see that if you're just a shop of one, that you might need to start branching out because, of course, the amount of digital records that we produce grows and grows every day. So the bottleneck does become a one-person team. So do be open to bringing in other people as needed. And then sort of a nice to have is to make sure that your staff are at least socialized with your records program. We're going to be rolling this out and potentially impacting the way that they do their work. We want to make sure that they understand why we're doing it and the value that comes from it, right? Other things that we want to make sure that we are getting ready ahead of time is some questions that if a sponsor or a stakeholder asks us, we do have this all flushed out. Where are we applying our records program to? Is this just SharePoint Online records? What about our OneDrives or our Teams messages? What about our greater sphere of our email? Email management is its own records management project in of itself. Does it make time to roll them both out at once? Or should we give a break so that users don't experience too much change at once? So we really want to flush out the scope of our actual project. Be ready to have some difficult conversations as well, right? So make sure that we are equipped for these conversations. If we tell users, hey, you're no longer able to actually delete your files, or hey, unfortunately, you do have to restructure your content to be a little bit more record focused, be prepared for a little bit of pushback and really lead with the benefits and efficiencies that it's going to bring, right? Less redundant content, we're no longer in sort of legal risk, and just overall a lot easier to search more relevant data. And who are our project champions and our sponsors? If you are just trying to sell your records project as a team of one, just your information manager or records manager, it's going to be really, really hard to get buy-in. So really find those project sponsors. Who can be your project champions from these departments? Find someone that's well liked in that department and can really help push it for you. And don't be afraid to point back to previous successes. So for example, we completed this with IT. They're loving their new system. That's a really good sell, because if it works for IT, a department can say it will work for me. So really plan out who you kind of have as these sponsors and these champions for your project. Another aspect that we should be aware of as well is how we communicate our project success to our executive team, right? The people that are actually footing the bill. At the end of the day, a records management project in their eyes might not be the neatest or prettiest thing. It does not generate revenue, of course. It does cost revenue, but those savings are very important in the long run for efficiency. So make sure that we're speaking their lingo and define clear success criteria that we can communicate back to them. So maybe we are classifying 85% of our records. Maybe we're decreasing storage costs by about 20%, culling through that redundant and obsolete data. Maybe by doing a records program, we actually get to save on insurance. So maybe we lower our insurance costs by 15%. Maybe by having a records thing in place, we now can pass some security assessments so we can achieve 100 new customers. Or if we do get audited quite frequently, we have fewer negative audits because we are now being compliant. Very much like your project champions, it's always an awesome tip to find one of these executives that you can lean on, particularly someone that's well liked to help socialize the program. You know, if people hate Bob and Bob always brings about disastrous change, probably don't want to pick Bob because people already don't like him and they're going to immediately associate negative things with your program. But if people really love Jordan, see if Jordan will be willing to kind of socialize this with the business users and make sure that they're on board and get that user buy-in. And a big thing as well is to make sure that we are planning for the user adoption. At the end of the day, if a user is not using our system, then what's the point of it, right? We can classify every location as much as we want, but if our users aren't adding files there, then the program's going to fail. For example, one of the clients that I worked with recently, they had originally tried to roll out metadata-based retention. The users just ended up creating a new document library that had no metadata on it because they did not want to go and apply 15 categories of metadata. So being aware of this, because the definition of user adoption, as we see on the screen in the bold, is they need to consistently use. For them to consistently use our system, we need to make sure that we are being flexible to both the user friendliness and also achieving that compliance in one rolled up package, so it's the best of both worlds. To do that, that's where we're going to get into section 3, our SharePoint best practices for records management. Now, I know that we might think about SharePoint as just sort of where we store our files and, you know, not the fancy Purview where we actually do our disposition reviews, but the way we structure our content is really critical to our overall records program. So we call this our information architecture. This is how we store, structure, and label our content so that it's easy to find and easily able to classify our content long term. So here's just on this slide some of the key things about it. Big ones here are searching and governance, as well as metadata. When we talk about metadata, this is our data about the data, or kind of some of those little fields that help us describe and define our data. Something really important to note is we can actually leverage this as part of our records program. So maybe one of these metadata fields is something like a contract termination date, or maybe it is an employee's termination date, things like that. Dates are excellent in there, or maybe our case is now closed, so we switch it to a closed status, and that can then help us trigger different retention. A big tip is the golden rule of 2. No more than 2 clicks to find our file, and no more than 2 required pieces of metadata to achieve success. If we have 15 things of required metadata, no user is going to want to add a file there. It's going to take them 15 minutes to upload their file. If possible, try and default things where applicable and make sure that we are actually keeping it to a minimum. So for information architecture, we always strive to achieve these 3 key pillars to make everything a success. The first is our findability. Can users easily find the files that they're looking for? If they can't, then they're not going to use your system. The second piece is that usability. Do they know where to place the files? So this oftentimes means using that user language that they're familiar with. So instead of naming a library, you know, based on our retention schedule, maybe that's LIG 123.845. The user doesn't know what that means, but they know what an invoice is. So making sure we're naming things appropriately, that a user can identify that's where I'm going to place this file, and we can now automatically classify based on that. And the last key pillar is the one we're all here about today, is that governance aspect. Making sure we're being compliant without impeding on the user experience. So the user simply, in an ideal system, adds a file to a location and automatically it's classified. I don't have to jump through any other hoops. I don't have to, provide my DNA and click 18 metadata fields. It's just done because I've added it to the appropriate location. To achieve this, there's a couple of different routes that we can go, and some are better than others. There is no one rule fit all, as we'll kind of see at the end on this slide. The first method that we can go with is kind of what we call our choose your own adventure. So this is where, if we think about those stories, we can pick the path that we want, and it's a little bit chaotic at times. This is where we kind of apply retention in place on what the business already has. So great if we already have an existing SharePoint environment, maybe we don't need to fully restructure everything at all. The pros here, excellent for user buy-in, right? We're not changing the way that users are storing their files. We're adding records management on top of it. So it does allow them for that flexibility and that freedom, which is really going to help them buy into your records program. However, it is very time consuming. I'm working with an oil company on this approach, and we've been dealing with them for 2 years, and we're still not all the way through all of their SharePoint sites. Another con is it's not standardized, so it's not something that easily maps to the retention schedule. So if we get a new records manager, might not be the easiest one-to-one. And as users start to create new locations, it can be easy to get out of compliance. The second approach is the total opposite of that. This is our locked down approach. This is where we, as the records team, work with IT to really structure out these SharePoint sites in a records-focused approach. Again, we're using user-friendly names, but maybe this is something like all of finance is on one site. No users can create document libraries, and no users can create top-level folders. This is great for achieving that compliance, and it's great if you're migrating into SharePoint. So if you don't have a SharePoint environment, this one's a great approach because it's really easy to set up net new and simply map your migration into these new locations. However, this one does have the highest amount of effort for change management and training. Users need to start to understand how to both find and place their files. Can be a little bit less user-friendly if it's not as intuitive, if you've got a bit of a complex retention schedule, and potentially it might mean they have to change some other business processes. The last approach is what we call controlled chaos. This is a blending of both of these first two approaches, where we lock down sort of the higher level areas. So maybe no users can create new document libraries, but they can create some top level folders or second level folders. After that point, they have total freedom. We don't really care where they're adding it because it's already being added to a place that is compliant. So it's great because we have that sort of middle between these two where it's pretty quick to deploy, but not as quick as the first approach. And it does have that compromise between your flexibility for your end users, as well as your standardization. It's about the middle for change management and training. If you change up the structure a lot, you're going to have a lot more to do. If you just make minor tweaks and adjustments, it's a lot less that you're going to have to do. But again, I cannot stress this enough. There is no one best fit for anyone. This isn't we come into an organization and say, this is the approach you're going to do. It really does depend on where you are in SharePoint or not in SharePoint, and how your users kind of do their business currently. So it really takes actually meeting with the business to understand what they're doing to best recommend an approach for them. But regardless of what approach that we actually do have, our SharePoint best practices across any of these approaches is the first to limit creation. This is limiting the creation of high-level containers. So this is your team sites, your teams, your SharePoint sites, as well as M365 groups, and even document libraries. The reason that we would do this is to tackle content sprawl. If users have less locations to actually add a file, there's a less likelihood that they're going to add it to a location that they shouldn't be, or a location that doesn't have retention. So by limiting that creation, that will allow us to actually make sure users are adding files to locations where they will get automatically classified. Hand in hand with this is do have creation procedure. So because we're stopping users from creating these high-level containers, we do need a procedure to make sure that they can request for new ones. This is maybe a form that they fill out or an email that they reach out to say, hey, we have a new project, please help us create a new project site, or hey, we have a new type of record. I don't think it quite fits anything that we have here. Can you please help us? That's going to allow you to tackle that creation all at once. So it's tracked, you know where it's going to be, and you can immediately start to classify it upon creation. So you're not going to have a bunch of unclassified sites going forward. And lastly, this is the one that you definitely want to make sure you're doing and pitching to executives when you can, is please try out a pilot, right? One of these approaches might sound really awesome, but when our users actually get in the system, maybe they absolutely hate it. And maybe another approach is more appropriate. But we have no way of actually knowing that until we actually let the users test. So please, please, please let a pilot unit actually test this out. And don't just pick an easy one like, this group only works with one type of record. If they like it, everyone will. Do take on that challenge of a bit more of a tricky group so that you can make sure if it works for them, it will work for everybody else. On this slide here, we just see sort of a sample architecture, what you might see in SharePoint, your hub sites, your sites, libraries, folders, etc. But we can see here, we do recommend trying to fix and lock down the creation of any sort of site, whether it's hub, team communication, as well as document libraries. And after that, you can be flexible and let users create folders and subfolders, knowing that those libraries automatically have default retention. So now that we've got our SharePoint set up and we are actually able to have users apply or add records to locations automatically, let's talk about now our Purview records management. So how can we actually make sure that we are automatically classifying these files? So there's two key things to think about when we are actually rolling out Purview records management. The first is the actual retention labels themselves. So how are these going to be configured? Are there actions that are going to be blocked or allowed? And secondly, how are we going to apply these retention labels to our files? Is that manual? Is that defaulted? Or is that automatic? Once we've decided on these two key elements, which we will break down here today, this is what will lead us to our unified approach, where we have a clear rollout plan and everything is standardized for us to fall back on. So this slide, I'm not going to read through all these boxes. It's just sort of for information. I'll just talk through them all throughout my experience and at a high level. But there's a bunch of different configurations you can actually do for retention labels. I will call out that to do anything with the disposition review or on the left-hand or on the right-hand side here, anything that is a record, that will need E5 licenses. So some of those earlier questions that were in the chat, this is another thing where if you need disposition reviews, which you should, or if you need any sort of audit logs, disposition trails, that is tied to an E5 license. So do be aware of that. That to use these excellent features, we will need to license up if we don't have those licenses. A delete label will allow a user to delete it before the content has met its end of retention period. So this is really good for transitory content. I find that this is oftentimes what organizations go with, so that if a user chooses to delete it, we don't care, it's a non-business record. We can allow something for a retain. A retain label will allow a user to delete it from the front end, but it is actually kept behind the scenes in the back end so that it will remain in the back end for the remainder of the retention period. Oftentimes, though, this is not the most ideal solution, as there is one step up where we can actually block the deletion of these. This is excellent because it trains users to not be deleting their business records, and we can allow them the tools to actually change it to something like a transitory label if it was accidentally uploaded and it is junk. But these are great because it allows us to move our files freely. We can do what we need to. We can edit them freely. No real changes to the way we do things, with the exception of we can either no longer delete them or they can be deleted and kept in the back end. We can also send these up for what we call a disposition review, meaning when our retention period has expired, it will go up to either whoever you define as your people to review these files prior to disposal. And I'll touch on that sort of best practices to that later on today. If we go a little bit further, we can kind of get to the more of the extremes where we're dealing with record labels. The value in a record label unlocked is that users cannot actually change that label. Once it's on the file, the users can't take it off. So it's really stuck as being this record, and they are totally blocked for deletion. However, these do tend to have some sort of problems as you can't move it fully all the time. Sometimes you do run into issues where you can't move it across different sites or things like that. So it is a little bit more restrictive. And because it is so tedious to take off for even an admin user, it does become quite tedious for cleanups in the event that someone uploaded incorrect files. It is a little bit trickier to actually take those labels off. And the furthest extreme is our record label locked. By default, users actually cannot edit these files at all. So this is really good for your final records, where maybe as we're working on it, it's a draft document, we can have that delete label on it. But once we actually copy it over to the final location, this is where we maybe want it to be a locked record label so that no one can delete it and no one can actually edit that file. So it is truly immutable. This becomes our immutable record. But again, that also could be a potential downside because users can't delete it, right? And that might be really tedious. And if they can't edit it and it's not intended for that, then it does become a challenge for them to actually upload and work on their files. Once you've actually selected the retention label configurations that you say, yep, I want some of these and some of these, let's get out to applying it. We have 3 different methods for a way we can apply our retention here. The first, which we'll dive into, is manual. So we rely on the users to actually tag things. This is supported for E5 or E3, again, considering that they do not have a disposition review. We have defaulted classification, which is where we default it on containers like a library or a folder, and any files that get added automatically inherit that. And auto classification, where we rely on some sort of event or some sort of condition, and Purview goes and automatically applies it for us. Let's dive into each a little bit here and see why we might select it. Manual here, if a user were to select a file, they can enter the properties of that file. And in there, there's going to be an apply label field. So we've published our label to our SharePoint site. The user has access to it to select it, and they can select it from the dropdown. As we might suspect, this is going to get really tedious really fast, as the user now has to do this on every file going forward, or else it's not going to get deleted by the retention schedule. Something else to note here is that a user will be able to see the durations. As we can see here, everything is 1 day. So this is where now not only is the onus on them, but they are the ones choosing the classifications themselves. If they're not familiar with the schedule, they might pick the one that's either at the top, or they might pick the one that says the longest duration, because why would they want their files deleted is probably the mindset that they're going to have. Not often the best. I would not recommend this approach. The only time a manual is ever really good is when you have something that is active and they need to just change it to obsolete or to delete so they can get rid of it from the system. Retention labels, by the way, I just saw a question in the chat. It can be applied retroactively to stuff you already have existing. So when you apply it to a folder or a library, it will actually go and propagate all the way down. A document library does give you the option to say, hey, I would like this to be on all of the files going forward and historic, or just go forward. So you do have that flexibility on a library. On a folder, once you apply a default, everything below it will inherit that default. This is on the defaulted retention here. On the library, we always do recommend a default label so that if users add new top-level folders, they automatically will get classified with some degree of retention, and someone can change that label if needed. But sometimes we need maybe our regular library is for finance, and then one of our folders is for our invoices. We can actually do staggered retention at different levels. Wherever we set the retention, that level onward will inherit. So for example, here on this particular example, in the document library for vendors, we have a contracts label. And when we create folders and subfolders, everything inside of it will inherit that same label. Now let's say that on this MSA folder, we can see at the bottom, we applied a blue label. Anything added to the MSA folder would actually inherit the blue label instead of the red label that the library is pushing downwards. So there is that flexibility that at different layers in your architecture, you can apply retention. However, I would recommend, please keep it to the highest levels only, no lower than at least 2. If you can keep it up to 1, that's the ideal, 1 folder level deep. Just because if you're dealing with things 5 levels down, it's going to be really hard to manage long term. And oftentimes the user might not even go that far down, and they'll just create a new folder for invoices. And now suddenly it's not being tagged as an invoice. The last method, auto classification, can be based on a couple of different things. So this can be based on sensitive information. So these are the out-of-the-box or custom sensitive information types where Microsoft can scan through your document and identify this is a credit card number. Additionally, there are trainable classifiers. It's a little bit more technical, but you can kind of give it your documents. So if you have a typical template, anything that matches that template, it can go and apply this retention thing to. Or the last one here, the one that we use most often, is specific words, phrases, or properties. And this is where we can actually assign metadata and map it so that if our metadata status equals a certain field, then apply this retention label. Something to note that makes this a little bit trickier is not only are auto applies a little bit more technical to set up, but we do have to actually be wary because if we have defaulted retention in a location, we cannot use an auto apply. An auto apply label will never override an existing retention label. That means that these locations should be isolated in their own document libraries when applicable, so that there's no default retention there, and we wait until the event has occurred before the auto apply actually kicks in. So for the example of option 3, this was that specific words, phrases, or properties. If we had a contract type or a contract status, we can map these fields to Purview, and we can say, please apply retention if the contract type is a statement of work and when the status is equal to closed. So while it's open, it does not get a retention label, but once we close it, it now will get that retention. Another thing to note is it's not instantaneous. It will take about 7 days for this auto apply to kick in. So please, if you set this up, don't fear if you change the metadata values and nothing's been applied. It does take time to crawl because it is a cloud service. Typically, we actually do see, though, it does crawl oftentimes on the weekend when no one's really in the system. So it does just take a couple days for that to actually propagate down to those files. Just a quick recap of these 3 approaches. Manual, easiest to deploy. You just publish labels to users and they get going and applying. However, it does have that lower classification rate because users need to be trained on the retention schedule. It is a bigger lift for them. They now actually have to go and change these labels themselves. And you do run into that fallacy where, if I had an option of something that gets deleted after 1 year or 100 years, why as a user would I not pick 100 years? And that's typically what they do. Defaulted classification, when we talk about the SharePoint best practices earlier, this is where we bake it into that structure. So when we design our new structure, we design it with this records-focused approach, so we can easily default this retention. So users add their files and automatically they get that classification. Typically, this is a heavier lift at a one-time time only. So initially, we do have to classify all this content. It's a heavier lift. Going forward, it's a lot easier because only when new locations arise should we have to actually classify the content. This is used in about 80, 85 to 90% of the time, I would say, through my experience. It is a bit longer to deploy because you do have to meet with the business users quite heavily on it to identify what records they store and where they store them. So that runs into availability bottlenecks. We can't deal with the finance group until after tax season. So maybe we've got a weird kind of gap of 1 month in our records program while we wait for finance to close up their tax season. As well, you oftentimes do need to do some degree of restructuring. Again, if we think back to those 3 approaches, if we're going to the controlled chaos approach, maybe we shift things to new document libraries, then that does take some restructuring, which is a little bit more time consuming there as well. Auto classification, where we automatically apply, is great for flexible changing information architecture, excellent for case-based or trigger-based retention, right? We can't do this until this event is closed or until this date has passed. This is going to be our ideal way to do that. This is used about 20 to 10% of the time in an organization. The cons on this, it is a bit more technical to deploy. Someone does have to trigger this event. So even though we have the automatically applied, a user still has to identify to the system that, hey, this is a closed document, or this case is fully closed, please apply retention. So there is still some degree of someone needing to do that. For dates, something like a calendar year or fiscal year, you can kind of build that in with defaults, so not as big of a concern there. And the biggest con on this one is that we can't have defaulted retention, right? So we do have to be cognizant of where we apply this. We can't really pair this ideally with the defaulted in the same location. Oftentimes it does mean we have to isolate it to its own document library. Maybe that works great for your architecture. Maybe that's a bit of a struggle. So it really does depend on the organization. So now that we've kind of identified the different approaches that we're wanting to start with, how can we actually get things rolling, right? Maybe we're still pitching for this funding or we're wanting to get this project rolled out and we just need that buy-in. What can we do in the interim to make sure that we're prepared for a quick rollout so that we can immediately jump into it once we get that approval? Well, as I noted earlier, we do want to make sure that our RRS is up to date and that we do have one, but we also need to think about making this digital ready, sorry. Right, our record schedule works excellent for our physical records, but oftentimes it's not ready for a digital space immediately. So this is where we want to start thinking about things like, what do we base this on? Is this on the date it was modified, the created date, the labeled date? Are there any actions that we need to block? Things like retain, should we block people from deleting? Do we want to lock it altogether? And how do we deal with the end of the life? Is this something that we auto-delete? Is this something that we have a disposition approval workflow for, where we identify our records manager and some OPRs? Do we change our label or things like that? We also want to start thinking about how we deal with those trigger and case-based retention. Things like obsolete, right? In the real world, we take that the piece of paper off of the whiteboard, we put the next one on. This is now our main one, and this other one is now superseded. In a digital space, how do you guys do that? Is it you overwrite the file? Are you editing the same file continuously? That's the things that you really want to flush out. Other things that you want to make sure that we're ready to go for is defining our disposition approval process. So in Purview, you can have up to 5 stages of review. The most common one that I do see is where the first stage goes to our Office of Primary Responsibility, or our OPR. Think of our Director of Finance or our Director of Infrastructure. They get the first pass at the file. Do they say, yep, this is ready for deletion, or nope, this file is still active? And then the second stage typically does go to your information governor or your records manager, where they say, yep, this file can truly get deleted. And then we have our destruction log from that as well. Really big thing here as well is do create what we call a retention blueprint. So as we make these decisions, let's document them, right? When we deal with something that's obsolete, superseded, how do we handle it? This way? Perfect. Let's document that so we can stick to it. Every key decision that we make, we need to document in this so that if we meet a department 5 departments down the road, we can meet with them and say, oh, these guys are dealing with a case-based retention. Let's see what we've been doing historically, and we can make sure that we have a consistent and concise rollout. And do a departmental approach. Don't do a big bang where we're trying to do all people at once. You're going to run into a lot of headaches, scheduling nightmare. It's not going to be successful, but do different departments and make sure we're making the order clear. It makes sense to do IT now. They're a little bit trickier, and then finance when they're free and not in tax season. So make sure that we're being cognizant of their availability. While it might be our full-time job, it's not the department's full-time job. So any contributions that they have, which are key to this, are on their own time. So we do want to make sure that we are being respectful of that and scheduling it when it makes sense for them. So let's recap here throughout this presentation with some real world lessons learned that we've picked up from Cadence and I've picked up on all these different projects. I think I've got about 7 here. The first one is define our success criteria and use it for decision making. If this is to classify things to 85% of them are classified, let's make sure we're following that in all the decisions that we make. Versus if our thing is to make sure we are deleting a lot of records, let's make sure that we're not tagging things with a lot of long-term labels. So this is where we really have to define what success looks like for us and our executives and bring that with us for all of our decisions going forward. Number 2, prioritize the user experience. As we've already driven home today, if the users aren't using your system, then your system of record is pointless. They're not going to add it where it's classified, then what was the point of us classifying it to begin with? So make sure we're doing both the records-focused approach, but blending it in with that user friendliness so that they're actually going to use and respect our system. Number 3, choose our information architecture approach early and conduct a pilot. So we pick one of those 3 approaches, that choose your own adventure, the controlled chaos, or the bit of both, the lockdown. That's where we can actually pick the one that looks best for our organization based on if we're in SharePoint or not. And let's pilot it with our business to make sure that it works for them. Number 4, only control what needs to be controlled. If we simply need to block deletion of files, let's just pick the retain without delete so that the users have the least impact possible. It doesn't mean that we have to go just because we can't delete it and lock the file down so that no users can edit. That's just controlling what doesn't need to be controlled, and they're not going to select those labels going forward. Number 5, create that blueprint, and as we go, let's keep updating it and keep referencing it so we have consistency throughout our rollout going forward. Number 6, try to reduce the complexity of our record retention schedule. Again, it works great for the physical world. Not everything has a one-to-one mapping in the digital space. So start to see where we can consolidate things. Do we really need a true calendar year, or can we base it on the created date? Things like that are very important to start considering when we're trying to reduce the complexity for an easier rollout. And lastly, this is a big one. Don't set and forget it. Do build in procedures to review this regularly. Update your schedule regularly. and make sure that we are actually meeting with the business users to make sure that they're classifying their files going forward. If we set it and forget it, there's going to be content sprawl, new locations, and users are going to be adding files wherever they please. And then it really defeated all that work that we really put into it. So that's sort of the end-to-end sort of best practices in rolling out records. So I'll pass it back off to you, Jordan, so that we can roll through sort of some of those closing statements here.
Excellent. Just keep the deck up there, Tyler. I've been going through the Q&A like mad for the last 40-ish or so minutes. So a couple things coming up, as Jennifer mentioned at the start, we do Microsoft Purview Records Management training. What makes this a little bit different than what I would say is a typical training is we're not going to sit there and lecture you like an old man for 3 days. This is hands-on in our lab training where you'll actually get the ability to set up Purview with someone like Tyler or one of our trainers, go through build labels, go through the full cycle of building an IA in SharePoint, and go through all the way to a disposition and destruction cycle. So it's hands-on. One of the frustrations I had with my team is going into training, a lot of it was just death by PowerPoint and doesn't soak in very well. So we created this lab. There are limited spots based on the number of seats we have in our lab, but that does keep the quality very high. So if you're interested in that, ARMA members get a discount. You can find that through the link there or through the ARMA community. Next slide, Tyler. Excellent. So we'll do the live draw for that. I'm gonna, you know what? I might steal the screen share back because in this day and age, nobody trusts anybody. So I'm going to share a random number generator. We have 170 folks right now that are not panelists. So I'm going to steal the screen share. And I'm going to pull up Edge. We're going to type in 170. You see that, Tyler? Head nod?
I do. Yep.
Okay, we're going to generate. And then we're going to go down the list. Number 36 in the chat list is our winner. The participants window. Are you counting that out, Tyler?
My count looks like Cora Lowe.
Cora Lowe. Well, Cora, shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat as well, and we'll get you signed up. So out of curiosity as well, who knew that was a thing before the webinar? We're not sure if like that was advertised well by us or how that would, if you get a thumbs up or comment in the chat, that helps us do this a little bit differently next time as well. I'll get a few thumbs up, a couple surprised faces, so that's great. I will just rifle through some of this quick, Tyler, to where we were. All right. If you do want to learn more, we've done a couple different webinars. There's some in the backlog queue there from August. We have a couple other ones coming up October and November in partnership with ARMA as well. So you'll get the email blast from ARMA. Some of those are on automatic classification with AI. I know that was some of the questions I got in the chat there. So we're going to show you how that can be done. And we're also going to be at InfoCon. So if you're going to be at InfoCon, actually, it's one of the conferences that we advocate for the most. We'll be at InfoCon late October as well. We're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube. We do a ton of articles on our website as well. So if you do want to keep up to speed and educated, that's a way of keeping in touch, or at least getting to know what's next. I'm going to jump right to the question period. I answered a ton live. I'm going to pull up the Q&A here as well. I'll just hit stop share so I can see the Q&A. And Tyler, are there any outstanding that you see in there?
I'm just finishing up the last one, asking if we have records management training in 2026. And yes, we absolutely will. We're actually going to be kind of restructuring our training content so that it's more up to date. We're always trying to make sure we're up to date with all the different Microsoft changes. So if you do take it next year and this year, we're going to be updating them going forward as well. So that's sort of what falls on my plate. I do make sure that these are updated regularly when new changes do arrive.
So I had a couple. Go ahead, Jen.
I was going to pop in here too. We do have somebody with their hand raised that would like to ask a live question. So Shirley, whenever you're ready. But you guys do finish your announcements, and then I will allow Shirley to come on and give her the warning that she's going to come on.
I had one question I promised to answer live that was in the chat. I just have to go dig that one up. Can Purview RM classify at the folder level in SharePoint?
Yes, the answer is yes. That can be both through the default approach and the auto apply. We can use both methods to actually default at the folder, and then the user simply adds a file in there and it gets that classification.
Awesome.
And the other one was, do we have a full list of questions or prompts that you have come across that you're able to share that we can use during the project planning phase? That was probably a little deeper for this call, but we do have our kind of standard, we'll call like discovery questionnaire that we go through with organizations as we're trying to see if it's a fit for the project. My one tip on that we ran into at one organization is, what are the executives getting compensated by? We had one project where the executives were actually bonused based on number of departments implemented into their ECM system. So once you figure out that objective, it was very easy to make them happy and get your budget and actually go through and fund and fulfill a project. So happy to have a further conversation on that, Amy, if you want to reach out. Jen, I will let you unleash
All
whoever's
right.
asking the question.
Shirley, you are unmuted, so you are allowed to come on and ask your question of Jordan and Taylor.
I think still muted, but allowed to speak. If you want to unmute, Shirley.
Yes.
All right, we'll wait on Shirley.
Yeah. Another question popped into the Q&A though, while we're waiting.
Perfect. This is
Can
asking
you
if you can
become
become certified, taking our records management training. Let lean on Jordan for this one, but our training is certified by both ARMA and ITIL. So regardless of kind of which branch you're coming from, it does provide different credits for both of those different branches.
Yeah, you get the CEUs, the continuing education credits. You get 12 based on ARMA, CIP, and IGP. Is that right, Jen?
Question.
Yeah, that right.
Good.
Another question I can see here in the chat was elaborating on the delete label. How can this be applied and where would it be used? So a delete label really just kind of sits on top of our content and says, after this period of time, please just delete this content. If we delete it prior to that, absolutely fine. No copies are kept, no actions are blocked. This is really good for transitory content. So our working drafts, if we have a working draft location and a final record location, we don't necessarily need to keep our drafts around forever, so that if users aren't moving it, it's getting deleted. So that's typically where we see that. Another one is also for some organizations publish a delete or obsolete label, so that if users upload a label that is kind of, they accidentally added a junk mail into their location and they want to get rid of it, they tag it with the delete label and it just deletes no problem, so that it's not really keeping a piece of junk in our record system forever.
I'll grab the next one there, Tyler. Lisa's asking, can Purview apply classifications and retention to structured data sources? So if you're familiar with Big ID can do that. Purview has also released their own cataloging ability to do that as well. It's quite new. It's within 2025. I believe we saw it early January on campus. But it is a budding function within the Purview stack. Melissa asked something on training, Tyler. I'll let you grab that one.
Yep, so will the hands-on training touch on data classification and configuration of labels and policies? It will. We will go in and actually configure different types of retention labels. We'll apply them together in the same environment. So we give you all a user account and you go along and do it with us. So we do cover the ins and outs of policies. Data classification, we do kind of touch on the best practices to do this, but because it really does vary for each organization, it's not something we can necessarily, train everyone to say, hey, here's how you identify this. Best recommendation is actually just know your retention schedule and meet with the business user. What records do you store here? What are they kept for? How long do you need them? And see how we can start to map these things back and forth.
Well, I think we got all the questions, Jen, so maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Here, sorry. Someone just asked, if we were keeping the record site completely separate from the working sites, is it important to add the delete labels? I would recommend yes on those sort of record sites, even if you think that users are going to incorrectly upload files there, right? If I'm putting my draft in there immediately, we want to make sure they have the option to remove those. But it is important just in case if they don't have those delete labels defaulted, it really doesn't encourage them to place it in your final record system. So if you don't kind of have, so to say, the stick to the carrot, then they're not going to go and actually find the place to put them. Does the training provide agencies stuck with E3 licensing any help or strategies? It covers a lot of E5 related stuff, but we can, if you want to reach out, talk about some E3 best practices. It is a little bit more limited based on not only the labels you can use, but how you can publish. So it is a bit tougher, but we do have some tips and tricks if you want to reach out to us there, Ali. Do you have formal justification I can use to submit to my organization so I can attend?
No, we don't actually. We can whip that together. I know Anonymous asked a lot of questions, so if you're going to shoot me an email, we can send you a justification.
And I will say, if you're looking for justification to attend InfoCon and do the in-person training, we do have justification, all kinds of tools on our website to help you get justification for that. We've got a budget builder and some different tools you can use to present to leadership to give you a justification to attend.
You can tell them that I'm running one of those sessions, so there's an instant buy-in there. Hey,
I mean, I look at it as it's true job training, so it is definitely a great resource and use of company resources to come and get some definite, upskilling for your job. So
one clever tactic I heard from a government worker was they used the term learning event versus conference when they pitch, and that, at least in Ottawa and Canada here, drove huge numbers at one of their community events because it was a learning event, not a conference. So kind of like working group versus committee.
Yeah. Doing it, changing it to learning event. But InfoCon's officially a learning event, not a conference. Well, we are officially out of time, and in respect of all of your time, thank you once again for joining us. Jordan, Taylor, thank you. This was great. There was a lot of great questions. We really, again, appreciate your time and bringing this knowledge to our community. We hope very much to see everyone on a future webinar. I know we've got a couple more coming up with you guys. And if we don't get to see you in Phoenix, please consider joining us for a future ARMA event and at the very least, a future ARMA webinar. So thank you again. See everyone very soon and have a great rest of your week.
Take care, everybody.